I caught my wife cheating with an illegal immigrant, so I took the worst revenge possible. My name's Joseph, and I'm 31 years old. The day everything changed began like any other. The sun was shining, and I had just finished a long day at work. I was looking forward to relaxing at home, but fate had other plans for me. When I walked into the house, I noticed something unusual. Megan's car was parked in the driveway, but she wasn't answering my calls or texts. I figured she was probably busy with something, so I decided to check in on her. As I entered the house, a sense of unease settled in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I called out for Megan, but the house was eerily silent. I made my way through the living room and up the stairs, my footsteps echoing through the empty space. I reached our bedroom and pushed the door open, only to be met with a sight that felt like a punch to the gut. There they were. Megan, my wife, was in bed with Roberto, our neighbor, a man I'd known for only a short while. Roberto was an illegal immigrant who had come to this country in search of a better life. He had always been friendly, if not a little too forward. Seeing him in bed with Megan, my heart shattered into a million pieces. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind struggling to process the scene before me. Megan looked up, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. Roberto, on the other hand, had a look of panic on his face. The room was filled with an awkward silence, broken only by the sound of my heavy breathing. "What the hell is going on?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice trembling with anger and disbelief. Megan scrambled to cover herself with the sheets, her face flushed with embarrassment. Roberto tried to get out of bed, but I could see the fear in his eyes. This was the last thing I had ever expected. Megan had always been so loving, so committed, or so I thought. "Megan, how could you do this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "How could you betray me like this?" She tried to explain, her words coming out in a jumble of excuses and apologies. But it was too late. The damage was done. Every word she said only made the pain worse. Trust I had in her was shattered beyond repair, and Roberto, the man who had once seemed like a harmless neighbor, was now the symbol of my betrayal. Roberto, realizing the gravity of the situation, quickly dressed and tried to make a run for it. I couldn't let him just walk away. Not after what I had seen. I grabbed his arm, stopping him in his tracks. His eyes were filled with fear, and for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy for him. But that sympathy quickly turned to anger. "You think you can just leave?" I demanded. "You think you can get away with this?" Roberto stammered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I'm sorry." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. His apologies felt hollow, insincere. Megan, on the other hand, was now sobbing uncontrollably. The sight of her tears only fueled my anger. I felt like my entire world had come crashing down, and I needed something, anything, to make it right. I could see Roberto's desperation. He was scared, and I knew he would do anything to avoid trouble. That's when a dark thought crossed my mind. If Roberto was deported, it would be a fitting punishment. It wouldn't undo the betrayal, but it would give me a sense of justice, of retribution. As Roberto made his way to the door, I let him go. The seed of vengeance had been planted. I watched him leave, knowing that I had to make a choice. I could either let this moment define me, or I could take control of the situation and ensure that Roberto paid for what he had done. Megan continued to plead, her voice breaking with each word. "Joseph, please, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." But her apologies felt empty. The trust I had once had in her was gone. I couldn't look at her without feeling a deep sense of betrayal. I felt like a fool for believing that our marriage was strong and unbreakable. The night was long and agonizing. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge. I knew I had to do something to regain control, to make sure that Roberto faced consequences for his actions. And as I stared into the darkness, I made a decision that would change everything. Pain of betrayal was overwhelming, and the path I chose was one of vengeance. I would report Roberto to the immigration authorities. It would be the worst revenge I could imagine, but it felt like the only way to get justice. And so, with a heavy heart, I began to plan my next move, knowing that the road ahead would be filled with pain and regret. The discovery had changed everything. My life, my marriage, and my sense of self had been shattered. and as I embarked on this path of revenge, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing a part of myself along the way. I had barely slept that night, my mind consumed by thoughts of betrayal and revenge. When morning came, the sun seemed to mock me with its brightness. I felt hollow, as if the world had lost its color. Megan's presence in the house was now unbearable, a constant reminder of the wound she had inflicted. She was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, her movements careful, as if she feared setting off a trap. She turned to face me, her eyes swollen from crying, but I could barely look at her. The sight of her made my stomach churn. Couldn't believe that the woman who had promised to love and cherish me had betrayed me so completely. "Joseph, we need to talk," Megan said, voice trembling. I nodded curtly, motioning for her to follow me to the living room. I wanted to have this conversation away from the places that once held happy memories. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the distance between us now symbolizing the emotional chasm that had opened up. "I'm listening," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Megan took a deep breath, her hands wringing together in her lap. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. What I did was unforgivable." "Unforgivable?" I repeated, my voice rising. "That's an understatement. You didn't just break my heart, Megan. You destroyed our life together." She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I never meant for any of this to happen. Roberto and I—" "Don't," I interrupted sharply. "Don't even try to justify it. I saw what I saw. You were with him in our bed. How could you betray me like that?" "I was confused," I said softly. "We've been having problems, and I made a terrible mistake. I'm so sorry." "Confused?" I echoed, my anger flaring. "Is that what you call it? A mistake? This wasn't just a slip-up. You let this go on long enough that it became a full-blown affair." Her eyes filled with tears again. "I know. I've been so selfish. I should have been honest with you about how I felt." "Honest?" I asked bitterly. "You were dishonest with me about everything. You let me believe that everything was fine while you were sleeping with someone else." She tried to reach out for my hand, but I pulled away. "I don't want your touch right now. I can't even look at you without feeling a wave of betrayal." "I understand," she said, her voice cracking. "But please, Joseph, try to understand that this was never about not loving you. I do love you. I got caught up in something I shouldn't have." I shook my head, unable to contain my frustration. "Love? What kind of love is this? The kind that allows you to throw away everything we had for a fleeting affair? You've broken the trust we built over years, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you." Megan's shoulders slumped, and she started to sob uncontrollably. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to fix things between us, and I made a terrible mistake." I felt a pang of guilt seeing her like this, but it was overshadowed by my own hurt. "You know what's worse? It's not just about you betraying me. It's about Roberto, too. He knew he was crossing a line, but he didn't care. He's just as responsible for this mess as you are." Megan's face turned pale. "Roberto? Joseph, please don't. He's just a part of this terrible mistake." "Just a part?" I snapped. "He's an illegal immigrant living next door. He took advantage of the situation, and now I'm left to pick up the pieces." Megan's eyes widened with fear. "What are you going to do?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision pressing heavily on my shoulders. "I'm going to make sure he faces the consequences of his actions. He needs to understand that what he did wasn't just a fling. It had real, painful repercussions." Megan's face crumpled in despair. "Please, Joseph, don't. This is going too far. It's not just about him, it's about us. Can't we find a way to work through this?" "Work through this?" I said, incredulous. "How do we work through something like this? How do we rebuild trust when it's been shattered beyond repair?" "You've made your choice, Megan. Now I have to make mine." The conversation ended with Megan's pleading and my resolve growing stronger. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let Roberto get away with this. The betrayal wasn't just a personal attack on me, it was an affront to everything I believed in. As Megan left the room, her sobs echoing behind her, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. It was a small comfort, but it was something. I began to make preparations, gathering evidence and planning my next steps. The path to revenge was not one I had chosen lightly, but it felt like the only way to regain control and find some semblance of justice. The emotional turmoil was unbearable, But I had made up my mind. I would see this through, no matter how much it hurt. Megan's betrayal had set me on a course that was both painful and necessary. And as I stared out the window, watching the world go by, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The weight of what I was about to do pressed heavily on my chest. Every step I took felt like walking through quicksand. The betrayal was a raw, throbbing wound that refused to heal, and the only way I could think to make it stop bleeding was by taking action. Harsh, irreversible action. The next morning, I woke up with a grim determination. I could no longer ignore the gnawing pain that Roberto had caused me, and as much as it pained me to admit it, reporting him to the immigration authorities seemed like the only way to regain a sense of control. I spent the entire day in a haze, going through every detail of what had happened. I knew I needed to gather solid evidence if I was going to make a compelling case. The thought of what I was doing felt almost surreal. I had always prided myself on my integrity, but now I was crossing a line I never thought I would approach. I started by gathering all the information I had about Roberto, his full name, his address, and any other details I could find. I rummaged through my old emails and texts, trying to piece together moments when he had been in contact with Megan or mentioned in conversation. It was a painstaking process, sifting through the remnants of what was supposed to be a normal life. Each piece of information I uncovered felt like a betrayal, a reminder of how deeply I had been hurt. I stumbled upon an old photo of Roberto and Megan from a neighborhood barbecue. They were standing close together, and the sight of it made my stomach churn. It was a small but tangible reminder of their deceit. I knew that reporting Roberto would have severe consequences, not just for him, but for me as well. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about making a statement. But as I prepared to act, I found myself questioning my own morality. Was I crossing a line I could never come back from? Anguish of betrayal was pushing me towards actions I had never imagined I would take. That evening, I drove to a local coffee shop with a sense of grim purpose. The cafe had become my makeshift office. I needed a place where I could think clearly, away from the oppressive silence of the house. I pulled out my laptop and began drafting a detailed report. I included everything I knew about Roberto, the evidence of his illegal status, and a summary of the affair. The cafe was bustling with activity. I felt completely isolated. As I typed, the clacking of keys was a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. I paused frequently, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, as the reality of what I was doing sank in. Each keystroke felt like a betrayal of my own values. I spent hours meticulously detailing every interaction Megan and Roberto had, the timeline of events, and the impact their actions had on me. I included screenshots of texts, photos, and any other relevant information. It was a comprehensive dossier designed to leave no room for doubt. When I finally finished, I sat back and stared at the screen, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and regret. The document was now ready to be sent to the authorities. My hands trembled as I clicked the send button. A sense of finality washed over me, and with it, a wave of emotions I hadn't expected. I returned home that night feeling hollow. The house was eerily quiet, and the weight of my decision hung heavy in the air. I sat in the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of happier times. The furniture, the photos, the little knickknacks, all of it seemed to mock me with memories of a life that felt increasingly distant. I was caught between a deep sense of betrayal and a cold satisfaction that I had taken action. I knew that Roberto's deportation would be a painful consequence, but it seemed like the only way to strike back. It was a way to assert some control over the situation and to punish those who had hurt me. The next few days were a blur. I kept my distance from Megan, who continued to beg for forgiveness and a chance to make things right. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. I was no longer interested in her excuses or apologies. My focus was solely on the aftermath of my decision and how it would unfold. The anticipation of Roberto's response to the report was a constant, gnawing presence. I could only imagine how he was reacting, whether he was feeling the same fear and desperation that I had felt when I first discovered the affair. I had crossed a line, and now I had to live with the consequence. Every day, I checked the news and waited for updates. The uncertainty was agonizing. I was caught in a limbo between the satisfaction of having taken revenge and the growing realization of the irreversible nature of my action. Eventually, I received confirmation that Roberto had been detained. The news was both a relief and a source of profound discomfort. I had achieved what I set out to do, but the victory felt hollow. The betrayal was no longer just a personal wound. It was now a public spectacle. As I looked around my empty house, I couldn't shake the feeling of loss. The home that once represented comfort and security now felt like a prison. The emotional cost of my decision was becoming clear, and I was left to grapple with the consequences of my actions. The pain of betrayal had driven me to take drastic measures, but it had also changed me. I was no longer the person I once was. And as I faced the reality of what I had done, I had to come to terms with the fact that I was forever marked by this chapter of my life. The days following Roberto's deportation were a whirlwind of emotions. The news came as a crushing blow to Megan and a twisted form of justice to me. I watched as the ramifications of my decision unfolded, feeling both the sting of triumph and the weight of regret. Megan was now a public pariah, her shame evident in every whispered conversation and every furtive glance she received. I saw her on the news, her face flushed with embarrassment as reporters hounded her for comments. It was a spectacle I had not anticipated, could not ignore. Her public humiliation was the final twist of the knife, and it was a bitter reminder of the cost of my revenge. The house was cold and silent, a reflection of the chasm that had grown between us. Megan's attempts to reach out were met with a wall of silence from me. She had become a stranger in my home, her presence a constant reminder of the betrayal that had shattered our lives. The comfort of our shared space had turned into a painful reminder of what we had lost. One afternoon, Megan approached me, with a trembling voice and tear-streaked face. She had come to me with a mixture of desperation and resignation. I could see the toll that the situation had taken on her. Public scrutiny and the fallout from Roberto's deportation had left her in a state of despair. "Joseph, please just hear me out," she pleaded. "I know I've made terrible mistakes, but I'm asking for one last chance to make things right." I looked at her, my heart heavy with conflicting emotion. I wanted to respond, to find some sense of closure or resolution, but I was too consumed by the anger and sadness that had taken root in me. The sight of her pleading face only fueled my resolve to sever the final ties that bound us. "Make things right?" I echoed bitterly. "What could you possibly say that would change anything? You betrayed me in the worst way possible. You were with someone who had no right to be in our lives, and now you're asking for forgiveness? It's too late for that." Her shoulders slumped and she looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I know I've hurt you deeply, and I'm so sorry for that. I never wanted any of this to happen. But please, Joseph, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make amends." I felt a pang of sorrow, but it was quickly overshadowed by the cold reality of what had happened. "Megan, this isn't about making amends. It's about the fact that everything we had is gone. I can't go back to what we once had. The trust is gone, and no amount of apologies can bring it back." The finality of my words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. Megan's tears flowed freely, but they did nothing to change my mind. I had made my decision, and I couldn't allow myself to be swayed by the emotional pleas. The damage was irreversible, and our marriage had been irrevocably altered. As the days turned into weeks, the emotional toll of my decision became increasingly apparent. I felt like I was trapped in a cycle of anger and regret. The revenge I had sought had come at a cost I hadn't fully anticipated. The satisfaction of seeing Roberto deported was overshadowed by the gnawing feeling that I had sacrificed a part of myself in the process. I struggled with the emotional fallout of my actions. The house, once filled with the promise of a future together, now felt like a barren landscape. Every corner, every piece of furniture seemed to mock me with reminders of what had been lost. I was haunted by the image of Megan's tears and the realization that I had played a role in her suffering. I began to withdraw from the world, avoiding friends and family who tried to offer support. The isolation was both a refuge and a prison. I needed time to process what had happened, but the solitude also deepened the sense of loss. I felt like a ghost in my own life, drifting through days without purpose or direction. Megan continued to reach out, but each attempt only reinforced the finality of our separation. Her messages became increasingly desperate, pleading for a chance to explain or to find a way forward. But my heart was resolute. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with the consequences. The final rupture came when Megan packed her belongings and left the house. The silence that followed was almost deafening. I was left alone with my thoughts, the weight of my decisions settling heavily on my shoulders. The house that had once been a home was now a stark reminder of the pain and betrayal that had brought us to this point. In the quiet of the empty house, I faced the full impact of my actions. Victory over Roberto felt hollow, and the emotional scars of the ordeal were raw and unhealed. I had sought revenge to find closure, but all I found was a deeper sense, loss, and regret. As I sat alone, staring at the vacant spaces where memories once lived, I realized that the path I had chosen had not brought the satisfaction I had hoped for. The emotional cost was steep, and the price of revenge had been my own peace of mind. I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been shattered by betrayal and retribution. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the road to healing seemed long and fraught with obstacles. The pain of what had happened was a constant companion, and I knew that moving forward would be a challenge. But amidst the darkness, I clung to the hope that eventually I would find a way to rebuild and find some semblance of peace. The road to recovery would be difficult, but it was the only path left to me. And as I faced the future, I knew that the scars of this chapter would be with me always, a reminder of the high cost of vengeance and the profound impact of betrayal. The days have a way of blending together when you're in the midst of recovery. It's been months since Megan left, and Roberto's deportation has become a distant memory. The weight of the decision I made still lingers, but life has a relentless way of moving forward, whether you're ready or not. I've spent a lot of time alone, reflecting on the past and trying to make sense of everything. I took a leave of absence from work, using the time to sort through my emotions and to decide what I wanted my future to look like. The house, now emptier than ever, has become both a sanctuary and a tomb for memories I wish I could forget. In the quiet of my solitude, I've wrestled with the decision to report Roberto. At times it felt like a victory, an act of retribution that was deserved. But other times the satisfaction was overshadowed by a profound sadness, a gnawing sense of what I had sacrificed. The decision was mine to make, and though it was fueled by the pain of betrayal, it has left me with a heavy heart. I often think about how things might have been different if I had chosen another path. What if I had confronted Roberto and Megan differently? Would there have been a way to salvage the remnants of our relationship? These questions swirl in my mind, but I know that dwelling on what-ifs won't change the past. What matters now is how I move forward. One day, I decided to clear out some of Megan's belongings that were still lying around. I found myself holding a photo album filled with pictures of happier times. Our wedding, vacations, and casual moments that seemed so innocent now. Flipping through the pages, I felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with a sharp, painful clarity. Those moments were real, but they were tainted by the betrayal that followed. I closed the album and put it away, a symbolic gesture of letting go. As I grappled with these emotions, I realized that moving on wasn't just about cleaning out the physical remnants of the past. It was about confronting and understanding the emotional aftermath. I sought counseling to help me navigate the complex feelings I was experiencing. Talking to a professional provided a safe space to explore my emotions and to understand the impact of my choices. It was a challenging process, but it offered insights that were crucial for my healing. One of the key realizations from therapy was that while revenge had provided a temporary sense of justice, it hadn't healed the deeper wounds. The decision to report Roberto had been driven by a need for closure, but true closure could only come from within. I had to come to terms with my actions and accept that the pain of betrayal was something I had to work through, not just try to erase. Gradually, I began to re-engage with the world. I started picking up old hobbies and exploring new interests. I took up hiking, something I had always wanted to do but never found the time for. Being in nature offered a reprieve from the constant churn of my thoughts. Fresh air and the solitude of the trails provided a form of meditation, helping me to clear my mind and to focus on the present. I also began reconnecting with friends and family. They had been supportive throughout the ordeal, but I had kept my distance, wrapped in my own cocoon of grief. Rebuilding these connections was important. It helped me remember that I wasn't alone and that there was a world outside the pain of my past. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. The emptiness of the house no longer felt like a prison. It was a blank canvas for my future. The emotional scars were still there, but they were no longer the only thing defining me. I had started to rediscover who I was, beyond the betrayal and the revenge. The pain of Megan's betrayal and the choice I made were always going to be a part of my story. They had shaped me, but they did not have to define my future. I found a sense of acceptance and understanding in this realization. I could not undo what had happened, but I could choose how to move forward. In the end, I came to understand that the decision to report Roberto, while extreme, had been a response to an intense emotional crisis. It had given me a sense of control when everything felt out of reach. But more importantly, it had been a catalyst for my own growth and self-discovery. I learned that revenge, while powerful, is not a solution to the deeper pain of betrayal. True healing comes from within, from confronting the hurt and choosing to move forward with a sense of purpose. As I look towards the future, I am cautious but hopeful. The road ahead will undoubtedly have its challenges, but I am determined to face them with resilience and an open heart. I have learned to embrace the journey of healing, recognizing that it is a process rather than a destination. And while the scars of the past will always be with me, they will no longer dictate my path. I am moving on, not just from the pain, but towards a future where I can find peace and perhaps even happiness again. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next video. See you next time.